Israel is attacking Syria, destroying Assad's military bases and assets, and taking up disputed land. Why is Netanyahu doing this? Is he trying to start another war, and how is the world reacting? The US too is carrying out strikes in Syria. They're going after the ISIS. Will the terror group make a comeback? Speaking of which, will Syrian refugees return? What will they return to? And what will it take to rebuild their lives and their country? $250 billion according to one estimate. We'll discuss all of this. Meanwhile, India's defense minister has just returned from Russia. He spoke about global pressures to cut ties amid reports that he may have sealed a new multi-billion-dollar deal with Moscow. We'll tell you all about it. How Xi Jinping is preparing for the trade war that Donald Trump promises to launch. Why Khalistanis are complaining about Indian visas, and how Canadian media is selling a non-story as some investigation. What is birthright citizenship? Can Donald Trump change the constitution and scrap it? And what will it mean for Indian Americans? Why the killer of a CEO in New York is being treated like a hero in the US? How more than 100 people were killed in an airstrike on a busy market in Sudan. How Zara posted record profits, came to rule the fast fashion industry, and is now being confronted with its seamy side. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. A suicide bomber kills the Afghan Minister for Refugees. The explosion took place at the ministry's office in the capital, Kabul. The Taliban minister was a brother of the founder of the Haqqani network. Responsibility for the attack, the Taliban have blamed the Islamic State terror group. Hungary's Prime Minister calls Russian President Putin to discuss the Ukraine war. Viktor Orban has cast himself as a possible peacemaker. This comes just days after Orban met US President-elect Donald Trump. Trump has promised to secure a Ukraine peace deal when he assumes office in January. Orban is the closest political partner of both Trump and Putin in the European Union. South Korean police say they were blocked from raiding the president's office. President Yoon Suk-yeol is under investigation for his brief imposition of martial law. The opposition accuses the presidential staff of protecting an insurrectionist. On Tuesday, President Yoon's former defense minister tried to kill himself before he was arrested. In India, the Aam Aadmi Party will fight the Delhi Assembly elections alone. The party's chief, Arvind Kejriwal, made the announcement, dismissing reports of forming any alliance with the Congress party. Kejriwal's party is aiming for a third consecutive term in Delhi. The elections are due to be held in February next year. And pressure mounts on French President Emmanuel Macron to name a new Prime Minister. Last week, Michel Barnier's government was ousted. The new government has to survive a no-confidence vote and also pass a budget for the next year to limit political and economic turmoil. Israel has a new target. They have already leveled Gaza, they have a truce with Lebanon, and now Prime Minister Netanyahu has turned his sights to Syria. He's pounding them with airstrikes. The attack started on Sunday, almost as soon as Bashar al-Assad's regime fell, and it's continued well into this week. Some 350 airstrikes were carried out in the last 48 hours. 350 airstrikes. Israel has released footage of their operations. Take a look. And what are they targeting? Assets of the Syrian military. We're not talking about rebel factions or the Kurds. We are talking about the military of the fallen regime. Their research centers, their weapons factories, their ammunition depots, their naval assets, all of it has been destroyed by Israel. They used a combination of drones and fighter jets for this. Sites all over Syria were targeted, in Damascus, in Homs, in Tartus, in Palmyra, and in Latakia. And the damage is quite extensive. I'll show you the aftermath of two such attacks. One on a research center in the capital Damascus, and second on Syria's naval fleet. Take a look. The entire Syrian Navy is gone. All those ships were sitting ducks for Israeli strikes. They say 80% of Syria's military capabilities have been destroyed. The obvious question is why? Why is Israel attacking Syrian military sites? It's basically a preemptive strategy. Israel says these military capabilities could fall into extremist hands or into the hands of pro-Iran groups, and they could use these weapons to attack Israel. So Netanyahu is not waiting around for that to happen. He says we'll destroy the weapons anyway. He also sent a message to the new regime in Damascus. Listen in.
We want relations with the new regime in Syria. But if this regime allows Iran to reestablish itself in Syria, or allows the transfer of Iranian weapons or any other weapons to Hezbollah, or attacks us, we will respond forcefully and we will exact a heavy price from it. What happened to the previous regime will also happen to this regime.
It's an opportunistic move by Israel. Netanyahu knows the rebels are busy rebuilding. They're more focused on internal issues. So what does he do? He takes the chance to defang Syria's military. But Arab nations are not impressed. They're accusing Israel of exploiting Syria's condition.
It cannot be accepted that any party, including the Israeli occupation, to exploit this opportunity to occupy the lands of another sovereign country. Syria's sovereignty has not been violated for any reason other than this Israeli violation.
Most of the world agrees with this. They may not call out Israel specifically, but they have demanded the protection of Syria's territorial integrity. And it's obvious why. Israel is following a high-risk, high-reward policy. They already control a piece of Syrian land. It's called the Golan Heights. Israel seized it during the 1967 war, and they've had control over it since then. But when Assad fell, Israel pushed beyond it, beyond the Golan Heights. They took over a United Nations buffer zone in the Golan Heights. It's just 40 kilometers from Damascus. Now Israel says this operation is temporary and limited, that they have no intention of attacking the new regime, but the rebels may not see it that way. For starters, Israel's military is getting very close to them. Like I said, just 40 kilometers away. And secondly, Netanyahu is boasting about reshaping West Asia. He's openly taking credit for ousting Bashar al-Assad. And guess who believes him? Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. He's broken his silence on the regime change in Syria. Khamenei says it was plotted by Israel and the US.
There should be no doubt that what happened in Syria is the result of a joint plan between the United States and the Zionists. Yes, a neighboring government of Syria has played, is playing, and will continue to play a clear role in this matter. Everyone sees this, but the main actors, the principal agents, the real plotters, the masterminds, and the command center are in America and with the Zionist regime.
Now put yourself in the shoes of those rebel leaders. You have just established a new regime, but your neighbor has carried out 350 strikes on your land. He's destroyed your navy and missiles, and he's stationed soldiers very close to your capital. Would you feel threatened or not? Chances are you will. But the rebels have not lashed out at Israel yet. They are rightly focused on internal issues, on bringing back stability. But if these attacks continue, who knows? They can't just allow Israel to destroy Syria's entire military. These planes and missiles may have belonged to Assad, but the rebels stand to inherit them, which is why Israel's strategy is high risk, high reward. If they get away with it, it's one less enemy, or at least a weaker enemy. But if they don't, they could end up further destabilizing Syria. And remember, the last time that happened, ISIS was the winner. Speaking of the ISIS, the United States is worried about them. As Israeli warplanes pound Syria, there's another battle unfolding in the deserts. The US is targeting an old enemy, the Islamic State, or ISIS. Washington is worried about their comeback. Syria is in a state of flux. The ISIS could use this opportunity to mobilize its fighters and exploit the chaos. So the Americans too are taking preemptive action. They have struck 75 ISIS targets in the last few weeks. And these strikes come with a warning.
History shows how quickly moments of promise can descend into conflict and violence. ISIS will try to use this period to reestablish its capabilities, to create safe havens. As our precision strikes over the weekend demonstrate, we are determined not to let that happen.
Donald Trump shares these fears too. He doesn't want America to be pulled into another conflict. This is not our fight. That's what Trump wrote on his platform Truth Social. His team is tracking these developments closely. That's Trump's transition team. They've been talking to the Biden administration. They've been reviewing the situation in Syria. The Pentagon has also issued a statement. That's the US Defense Ministry. They say that their mission is to defeat ISIS.
There's a potential that elements in the area, such as ISIS, could try to take advantage of this opportunity and regain capability.
What is this mission? And why is the US still worried about ISIS? Let me take you back to the year 2014, when the ISIS was at its peak. They controlled large parts of Syria and Iraq. They announced the creation of an Islamic caliphate. Major world powers then stepped into Syria, intense fighting followed, and by 2019 the caliphate collapsed. The ISIS was defeated, but it wasn't eliminated. Until July this year, ISIS had around 2,500 fighters spread across Syria and Iraq, and they have been launching attacks too. In the first 6 months of 2024, ISIS claimed responsibility for some 153 attacks. The group has been active in northern and western Syria. They're operating mostly in the desert now and near Syria's border with Iraq. In recent days, there has been more activity in these areas. Fresh clashes were reported last week. 3 groups were fighting each other: the rebels, Assad's government forces, and terrorists from ISIS. Reports say ISIS fighters are on the move again. They tried to take advantage of the situation and killed at least 54 soldiers from Assad's army. These soldiers were trying to flee Homs. It's a central province which fell to the rebels recently. All of these developments make one thing quite clear: the ISIS may be weaker, it may not have a lot of fighters, but it can still inflict damage. And that is what's making the Americans nervous, the very prospect. The US says the Islamic State is trying to boost its ranks. They're focusing on prisons in northeast Syria. These prisons hold ISIS fighters. We're talking about some 9,000 men spread across 20 prisons. Reports say they're in the custody of Syrian Kurdish forces. A US official has called them, and I'm quoting, the largest collection of terrorist fighters in the world. Now, ISIS is trying to free these fighters. If 9,000 men escape, the ISIS could easily mount a comeback with their support. And so far, they've not been successful. But the US is not taking any chances. Syria continues to remain in disarray. There is a political vacuum, and the ISIS is trying to take advantage of it. So the threat is both real and immediate. How many troops does the US have in Syria? 900. These 900 American soldiers are up against a re-energized terrorist group. The ISIS may have been weakened by years of conflict, but the group remains dangerous with thousands of fighters still in the shadows. If not contained, the ISIS could grow into a larger, more formidable challenge. And if that happens, the next American president may have a new war on his hands. Donald Trump may not be a fan of wars, but he may be confronted with the inevitability of fighting one.
Today, it's the dream that we have since 2011. Like, we didn't imagine that this day will come, finally.
We are free and happy and proud, and it's so good to say that I'm from Syria now.
On December 8th, millions of Syrians across the globe woke up with hope. The Assad regime had fallen, their country was finally free, the rebels had won the war, there were celebrations in many countries around the world. But soon, the euphoria gave into anxiety about what happens next. Will they stay where they are as refugees, or will they return home, or what remains of their home? Syria's transitional prime minister has spoken about this. It's this man, Mohammed al-Bashir. He says he wants to bring back the millions of refugees. It's one of his main goals. But is it an attainable goal? In 2011, Syria's population was 21 million. Then came the civil war. 500,000 people were killed. About 14 million fled their homes, 14 million Syrians. 7 million of them were displaced internally, and another 7 million left Syria. They sought refuge in other countries. It triggered the world's largest refugee crisis. Initially, the world welcomed them with open arms. Syrians applied for asylum in more than 130 countries. But the vast majority of them live in 5 countries: Turkey, Lebanon, Germany, Jordan, and Iraq. Turkey hosts the largest population of Syrian refugees, around 3.3 million. Lebanon is the second largest host with nearly 1.5 million Syrians living there. On number 3 is Germany. It hosts nearly 1 million refugees from Syria. Then comes Jordan with over 600,000 refugees, and finally Iraq, which has about 300,000 Syrians. All of these refugees have a difficult decision to make. Some have already made up their minds, they're heading back home. In fact, we've seen videos from both Turkey and Lebanon, people packing their belongings into cars, hundreds driving down to Syria. There are long queues of people and cars, both at the Lebanon border and at the border with Turkey.
I was raised in Syria and lived in Syria. I've been deprived for 15 years from going to Syria. This is the first moment. We are waiting now until we are able to arrive, to go to Syria. My parents, my brothers, my grandfather's house and relatives are all there. We have been deprived for 15 years. We were forbidden to go to Syria.
So emotions are clearly running high and countries are capitalizing on it. Take Turkey, for example. It may be playing host to the largest number of Syrian refugees, but it hasn't been smooth sailing. There's a strong anti-immigrant sentiment there. For years, Erdogan's government tried to talk to the Assad regime to facilitate the return of these Syrians. It did not work. Now Assad is gone, and Erdogan wants to waste no time. He wants to send these refugees back home. Same with Europe. Initially, they welcomed the millions fleeing the war, but it did not sit well with the locals. Over the years, the sentiment has hardened as Europe's economy struggled. Refugees became enemy number 1. Political parties campaigned on anti-immigration platforms, and now with Assad out, these countries want the refugees to return. Countries like Germany, the UK, France, and Greece have stopped processing asylum applications from Syria. The pending applications, they've stopped processing them. They say they will facilitate a safe return of these refugees. Austria wants to repatriate or deport Syrians. Some governments are even offering perks or talking about them. A German lawmaker, for instance, talked about chartering planes, even starting a €1,000 fund for Syrians wanting to go back home. But it's not going to be easy.
I read in the news, which shocked me, that politicians are calling for €1,000 to be given to Syrians so that they have to or want to go back. I think that's a terrible idea. The situation in Syria is just as dangerous as it was before.
So the first obvious question is, what will these refugees, these Syrians, go back to? The war may be over, but it has left Syria in ruins. There's more rubble than jobs. Between 2011 and 2023, the economy shrank by 87%. Syria's currency has lost over 90% of its value. Key services like electricity, water and healthcare are in a shambles. More than 60% of the infrastructure has been destroyed. Unemployment is skyrocketing and poverty is widespread. For millions of people, there is simply nothing to return to. No homes, no jobs, no guarantee of safety. And then there's the political vacuum. Who will lead the reconstruction? What will it cost? By some estimates, it could take $250 billion to build back Syria. That's a lot of money, $250 billion. Where will it come from? All of these questions loom over Syria and its people whose lives have been torn apart by the war. Yes, there is new hope and promise of freedom, but the road to rebuilding is long, treacherous, and uncertain. The war may have been won, but the real battle is just beginning for Syrians. These are testing times for India and Russia. First, the war in Ukraine, and then with India's new defense focus. Russia used to dominate India's military imports, but now that's changing. We're producing a lot of weapons domestically. We're also buying from other sellers like America and France. It is in this backdrop that India's Defense Minister Rajnath Singh visited Moscow. Not only did he get an audience with President Vladimir Putin, he may have also bagged a multi-billion-dollar defense deal, one that could tackle China. Let's start from the top though. Rajnath Singh landed in Russia late on Sunday and his schedule was pretty packed. First up was the commissioning of a new warship, a stealth frigate called INS Tushil. Russia is making 2 such ships for the Indian Navy. The first was commissioned in Kaliningrad. The second one is still being made. It's called the INS Tamal. After this, Rajnath Singh returned to Moscow. He visited the tomb of the unknown soldier, and then the meetings began. First up were talks with the Russian defense minister. Both New Delhi and Moscow have a long-standing defense dialogue. This was the 21st edition. The Russian defense minister praised the India-Russia relationship. He said it was based on mutual respect.
Strong, time-tested friendship based on mutual respect ties our countries. Trustful relations of our state leaders play a key role in the strengthening of our bilateral ties.
Rajnath Singh's statement was very revealing. Yes, it featured all the usual praise, but it also talked about the pressures on India, the pressure to cut ties with Russia. In fact, let me quote from what he said. Despite geopolitical challenges and great pressure, both in public and in private, India has made a conscious decision to not only continue its close engagement with Russia, but also to deepen and expand the cooperation. That is a big admission. Rajnath Singh says that India is under great pressure, not just in private, but also in public. Yet India is keen to build ties with Russia. It conveys New Delhi's commitment to this relationship. Which brings us to Rajnath Singh's final meeting in Russia, the one with Vladimir Putin. The Defense Minister of India conveyed Prime Minister Modi's greetings to him. He also raised some uncomfortable issues, like the S-400 missiles. These are Russian missile batteries. India signed a deal to buy them way back in 2018. But 2 S-400 systems are yet to be delivered. Russia has agreed to ship them by 2025, although some reports say it could be delayed further to 2026. And that sums up the problem. India is already looking to diversify its military imports. These delays from Moscow will only accelerate it. Just look at the numbers. Russia made up 36% of India's arms imports last year. 36%. In 2009, its share was 76%. India is increasingly relying on the West now. Earlier, there were plans to make jets and helicopters with Russia, but those plans have been junked. And the US is a big beneficiary of this pivot. Since 2018, they have secured deals worth $20 billion from India. We're talking about cutting-edge weaponry like drones and jet engines. France is another beneficiary. India's Navy chief announced 2 major deals this week. One for Rafale fighter jets and another for Scorpene submarines. Listen to this.
As far as the repeat order of those 3 Scorpene submarines are concerned, that again is a very advanced stage of acquisition process. It is just a matter of completing the formalities of the acquisition process, and we expect that if not this month, next month, hopefully this both this and Rafale M should be signed.
Plus, India is also looking to produce domestically, not just for our use, but also for exports. Right now, India's defense exports are at 21,000 crore rupees. The target is to double that by 2029. And to do that, the government is considering a new move, setting up an Export Promotion Council or EPC. Such councils already exist for other products like spices or tea or rubber. They basically fine-tune export strategies. So India's long-term plan is quite clear: produce at home and import from a larger number of sources. But where does that leave India-Russia ties? Can it survive without defense? Well, that stage is still a long time away because India needs Russia for advanced weapons. For example, radars. Reports say India is keen to buy Russia's Voronezh system. This is a long-range radar. It can detect and track missiles and jets, and the range is quite impressive. Around 8,000 kilometers vertical and 6,000 kilometers horizontal. Russia says it can track 500 objects at once. If the deal is confirmed, this would significantly boost India's air defenses. It would help India repel threats from China and most of the Indian Ocean region. What's more, it's a boost to local production. Apparently, 60% of the radar will be made in India. The whole deal is expected to cost about $4 billion. So the Western belief or hope that India will simply dump Russian arms overnight is wrong. But like Rajnath Singh said, there is pressure. Both countries will have to try and reinvent this relationship, protect it from China and the West. A great opportunity will present itself in 2025 when Russian President Putin comes to India. This will be his first trip since 2021. Let's see if a long-term roadmap can be charted.
टॉर्चर किया हम लोग को, वो भी टॉर्चर किया, पर मेरा बच्चा अपने ऊपर सब लेके अपना मेरा बच्चा सब बर्दाश्त किया, हम लोग को भी नहीं सहने दिया, अपना कष्ट अपने झेलता रहा, अंदर ही अंदर घुट गया, एकदम बर्दाश्त से बाजुल कर दी, मेरा बच्चा एकदम अंदर से टूट गया था रे बाप रे बाप, मेरा बच्चा अंदर से बिल्कुल टूट गया था, इतना टॉर्चर हुआ मेरा बच्चा कि टूट गया एकदम अंदर से।
अभी मीडिया का ही दे रहा है क्या हुआ? बस लाश कहाँ?
मेरा बच्चा अंदर से बिल्कुल टूट गया।
आपके बेटा आपको कुछ बताए थे क्या हुआ था और हो क्या रहा था सर? क्यों ऐसा डिसीजन लिए हैं?
हमारा बेटा हमको कहता था कि पापा हम जाते हैं कोर्ट में तो हमारे पास हमको जो है सो पूरा जस्टिस नहीं मिलता है, वहाँ हर आदमी हमको जो है सो कानून व्यवस्था के अंतर्गत कोई काम नहीं होता है, और ये नियम से चलने वाला कानून से चलने वाला आदमी था, लेकिन ये कभी भी जो है सो वहाँ की कानून व्यवस्था को एकदम मानता था कि एकदम खत्म है।
सर क्या बताए थे सर आपके बेटा? इससे पहले आपकी जो बात हुई थी, कब बात हुई थी और क्या हुआ क्या था?
मार्च के महीना में वो गया था। मार्च के महीना के बाद जब आया ना तो कहा कि पापा वहाँ का जो मीडिएशन का जो जज हैं चाहे जो भी लोग है, वकील है, चाहे जज है, जो भी है, वो वहाँ के कानून व्यवस्था जो लॉ है अपने भारत का, उस लॉ से नहीं चलता है। लोग उस लॉ को मानता ही नहीं है। जो ये बता रहा था कि इस धारा में ये लॉ होना चाहिए, तो वो उसको हाई कोर्ट के, सुप्रीम कोर्ट के लॉ को भी नहीं मानता था।
क्या बोले थे आपके बेटा आपको? उनको हो क्या रहा था?
उनको कुछ नहीं, उनको तो 40 बार बेंगलोर, कम से कम 40 बार गया होगा बेंगलोर से बड़ा जौनपुर, और माने इतनी धारा उस पर, एक खत्म हो जाता था केस तो दूसरा लगा देती थी। इस बात के कारण जो है तो भीतर से फ्रस्ट्रेट था, लेकिन हम लोग को महसूस नहीं होने दिया कि क्या है नहीं है। एकाएक हम लोग को खबर गई है कि वो अपना पूरा मेल वगैरह हमारे छोटे लड़के को रात में किया है 1:30 बजे 2 बजे, हमारे पास 3 बजे उसका फ़ोन आया है। उसके बाद हम लोग कैसे कैसे करके वहाँ से पटना आए हैं, एयरपोर्ट पटना से बेंगलोर पहुँचे 4 बजे शाम में।
मतलब सर, आप जानते हैं कि उनके फैमिली कुछ जो अपने वाइफ के ऊपर और उनके फैमिली के ऊपर जो इल्ज़ाम लगाए हैं,
Now let's talk about the latest geopolitical showdown, the United States versus China, which also translates to Donald Trump versus Xi Jinping. Trump will take office next month, but he's already in action, shaking things up. The president-elect is laying the groundwork for a trade war. With all his threats and tough words, it looks inevitable. So the question now is, how will Xi Jinping respond to Donald Trump? President Xi is wasting no time. He's preparing for Donald Trump's return. The Chinese president is bolstering his defenses. He's gearing up for a fight and pulling together the tools that he'll need to fight this trade war. Our next report has the details.
I want to beat China in electronics production, and we'll be able to do that easily.
At the height of the campaign, Donald Trump made a bold promise to his supporters. He pledged to restore America's dominance in manufacturing. Trump's message was clear and direct. He wanted to beat China. Trump's pitch was effective, and it could have played a role in his victory. Now China noticed Trump's threats as well. So just days after his victory, Beijing struck back. China issued a statement and banned mineral exports to the United States. The order targeted 3 critical minerals: gallium, germanium, and antimony. They are essential for modern electronics, also for high-tech products like semiconductors or chips. They have defense applications as well. Antimony alone is used in ammunition, infrared missiles, and nuclear weapons. This was China's opening move, and now Beijing is taking more steps. This week, it launched an investigation into NVIDIA. NVIDIA's chips have helped in fueling the AI revolution. China claims the company violated its monopoly laws. The ban and the investigations are not random. They follow a clear pattern. Experts believe these are calculated steps by Beijing. China is weaponizing export controls. Their goal, to use them as bargaining chips in a potential trade war. But that's the last thing Beijing can afford right now. Its economy is struggling to recover. Beijing relies heavily on exports to drive growth. And exports are what made China an economic powerhouse. But that growth engine is just not firing anymore. Growth in exports has been sluggish. In November, China's exports grew by just 6.7%. This is a sharp drop from October, when China's exports increased by nearly 13%. If Trump follows through on his threats, China's economy could face more challenging times ahead. So far, Trump seems undeterred by Beijing's pressure tactics. Xi Jinping isn't taking this lightly. Yesterday, he issued a fresh warning to Trump. The Chinese president met with leaders from key financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. Without naming Trump, he raised the issue of trade tariffs. Xi Jinping said there won't be any winners in this battle. Last month, he had delivered a similar message to Joe Biden as well.
In an age of flourishing sci-tech revolution, neither decoupling nor supply chain disruption is the solution. Only mutually beneficial cooperation can lead to common development. Small yard, high fences is not what a major country should pursue.
But despite the warnings, a showdown seems inevitable. If Trump strikes, Xi Jinping looks ready to retaliate, and he's prepared to hit back with equal force.
Our next story is a bit odd. It involves India and Canada, specifically the Khalistanis in Canada. Canadian Khalistanis have started whining. They're complaining about the difficulties they face while applying for Indian visas, and I'm not making this up. A separatist group is complaining about travel restrictions. They went and whined to a Canadian media outlet, which was happy to release a quote-unquote investigation about this. And their findings are quite frankly ridiculous. But before I proceed, here's some context for our viewers, for those who may not know about this whole Khalistan saga. About half a century ago, some people wanted to carve up India. They wanted to create a new ethno-religious state for followers of the Sikh religion. They wanted to separate the Indian state of Punjab and call it Khalistan. It was a violent separatist movement. Thousands of people died because of it. Eventually, the movement was completely defeated in the 80s and 90s. But many of the separatists escaped India. They fled to countries like the US, the UK, and especially to Canada. They renounced their Indian citizenship and chose to become citizens of their host countries. Khalistani separatism is dead in India. But the overseas Khalistanis keep drumming up tensions. They vandalize Hindu temples, attack worshippers, and keep trying to revive the spectre of Khalistani terror. That's the current Khalistan problem in a nutshell. So obviously, the government of India is wary. It keeps tabs on these separatist leaders, and it's not keen on having them enter India. After all, who would willingly invite trouble? But the Khalistanis believe that this is some grave affront to them. They think that they're entitled to enter India at will. And they get shocked when their visas are denied or even delayed. And this brings me back to the new investigative report, the so-called investigative report. It features a story of a man with ties to Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Nijjar was a Khalistani separatist leader. India had designated him a terrorist. Nijjar was killed last year in Canada, and it was his death that sparked the recent India-Canada feud. Apart from being a terrorist, Nijjar was also the head of a Sikh Gurudwara. He was the president of a Guru Nanak temple in the Canadian city of Surrey. Before Nijjar took this post, the Gurudwara was led by a man called Bikramjit Singh Sandhar. Now, Sandhar was Nijjar's immediate predecessor. Nijjar turned out to be a terrorist, so you can imagine why the Indian government would be wary of Sandhar. In 2016, this man wanted to visit some relatives in India, so he applied for an Indian visa. That application was rejected. Officials at the Indian consulate in Vancouver gave him the reason for this. Sandhar had apparently made incendiary statements while he was the president of the Sarai Gurudwara. So the Indian officials accused him of supporting Khalistani separatism. And that seems like a valid reason to deny a visa. Ideally, that should have been that. But here's where the story gets absurd. Sandhar says that he received a letter a few days later. This letter, it was emailed to him through some intermediaries. Sandhar said that he was told to sign this letter and his visa troubles would go away. The letter itself is a bit strange. It's a declaration. The person who signs it declares that they have deep respect for India, that India is a great country, and that they never ever supported the Khalistan movement. As odd as this is, Sandhar says, this letter shows how India is, and I'm quoting, weaponizing visas. Let's pause here for a second. Are we to believe that officials at the Indian consulate are issuing childlike documents such as this? And that too through a shady network of intermediaries? I mean, what would be the point? If someone signs this, are they suddenly not Khalistani? And this, by the way, reminds me of visa applications in general. All visa forms have a section asking if the applicant is a terrorist. But no real terrorist is actually going to admit that. People only ever tick yes by accident, and I'm sure most governments know this too. Sandhar's letter is even more ridiculous. with blank spaces for him to fill and phrases like never ever. But he expects us to believe that this is some elaborate Indian conspiracy, that the government is using letters like this to pressurize Khalistanis, to get them to renounce their ways. Are you serious? But the Canadian media seems to have lapped this up. They say multiple people got letters such as this one. And this proves, and I'm quoting, this proves Indian interference. Towards the end of the story, we find that Sundar never signed the letter, but he was given a visa anyway. He managed to travel to India then in 2017. And he still whines that the consulate withheld the visa until the last moment. So this is what the whole report really comes down to. Basically, the Khalistanis are complaining about visa delays, and the Canadian media is taking up this cause. Donald Trump has a new target: birthright citizenship. It's part of the US Constitution. Anyone born in the United States gets automatic citizenship. That is birthright citizenship. Donald Trump doesn't like it though. He calls it a willful misinterpretation of the law. So his plan is to end it on day one in office. If he does, it will have far-reaching implications, especially for millions of immigrants. But the bigger question is, can Donald Trump even do it? Can he change the US Constitution, and what will it mean for America? And also how will it impact Indian Americans? Our next report tells you.
It was October 7th, 1885. Frederick Trump bought a one-way ticket to America. He was a 16-year-old barber searching for a better life. Frederick found that in the United States. He went on from becoming a barber to a real estate investor. Frederick had 3 children. All of them automatically became United States citizens because they were born in America. This is the immigrant story of Donald Trump's family. His grandfather was a migrant. His father became a citizen through birthright citizenship. But Trump doesn't seem to care about it much. In fact, he wants it to end on day one. But it won't be so easy. Trump could face some significant hurdles. So what exactly is birthright citizenship? After the American Civil War, the US Constitution added the 14th Amendment. The amendment was ratified in 1868. It was to ensure that the descendants of enslaved people brought to the United States became citizens. This framed the country's approach to citizenship. It led to what's known as birthright citizenship. It's pretty simple. Anyone born in the United States is a citizen of the United States. Basically, if you're born in the country, you get automatic citizenship. Donald Trump wants to challenge that. He says it's ridiculous and based on a historical myth. If Trump goes ahead with his plan, it could have far-reaching implications. Eliminating birthright citizenship will affect everyone, especially for millions of immigrants. Take Indian Americans, for example. They are a community of 5.4 million. Nearly 34% of them were born in the country. That's 1.6 million Indian Americans. If birthright citizenship is abolished, they will no longer have automatic proof of citizenship. But the bigger question is, can Donald Trump end it? For that, Trump needs to amend the US Constitution, and it's quite a challenging process. There are 2 main steps: proposal and ratification. An amendment can be proposed in one of 2 ways: a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers of Congress, or called by 2/3 of state legislatures. After an amendment is proposed, it must be ratified by the states. 3/4 of all state legislatures must approve it. This is not the first time Trump is talking about this. He talked about ending it in his first term as well. This time, he wants to do it with an executive order. But it isn't going to be so simple. It will likely be a very, very lengthy constitutional process. Trump may not succeed in this, but his proposal will spark legal battles, political showdowns, and deep divisions across the nation. Because at the heart of it all is a question: what does it mean to be American? Is it a birthright, a privilege, or something else entirely? Trump's vision could redefine US citizenship as we know it, but the road ahead is uncertain. Just like Frederick Trump's journey in 1885. Except, while he came to build a new life in America, his grandson seeks to close that door for others.
Nobody likes picking sides. It's often a tough and uncomfortable decision, but in some cases it's obvious. Like when there's a murder or a terror attack, the assumption is you side with the victim. But turns out that's not always the case. Last week, the CEO of United Healthcare was shot dead in New York. His name was Brian Thompson. He led one of the biggest insurance firms in America. His killer is a 26-year-old man, Luigi Mangione. The cops couldn't arrest him from the crime scene. All they had was a CCTV photo, so naturally they released the picture online. The hope was that someone would see him and tip them off. But guess what happened? Some internet users found the assassin cute. They began thirsting over his smile. If you think that's weird, buckle in. Luigi was finally arrested on Monday from a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. Someone spotted him there and alerted the cops. Again, guess what happened next? Internet users began dropping negative reviews for that McDonald's. They called the staff rats and snitches. Why? Because they tipped off the police. And it doesn't end here. The bullet casings used by Luigi were engraved. They said, deny, defund and depose. Those words are linked to a book published in 2010, a book that criticized the health insurance industry. Once again, guess what happened next? People are selling merchandise with those very words. You can find it on Amazon. T-shirts that say, deny, defund and depose. Mugs, hats, pint glasses. All of them with the same wording. On social media, sympathy is pouring in for the shooter. He's become a sort of a hero. A man who stood up to the insurance industry. Meanwhile, the CEO is getting the stick. The man who's dead. Some users say he got what he deserved. What explains these topsy-turvy emotions? Well, first of all, let me say this. You must never condone violence. Killing someone is never the answer to any problem. This CEO had a wife and two sons, a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. They had nothing to do with the insurance issues or the health care reforms. All they know is that their father is dead. And that's not something to celebrate. Having said that, it does raise some questions. A recent survey looked at healthcare in 10 high-income nations. The United States came in dead last. Around 53% Americans do not like their healthcare system, and with good reason. Most insurers use a vetting process. They call it prior authorization. Say you're getting a medical procedure or you've been prescribed a medicine, the insurers won't automatically cover it. They will first check whether the service or drug is necessary. Only then will they pay for it. And insurers are misusing this tactic. Prior authorizations were used 46 million times in 2022. That's up from 37 million times in 2019. And this is not for the general population. This is for people aged 65 and above, and also specially abled people. Even after this vetting, approval is not guaranteed. United Healthcare, for example, denied almost 9% of the requests. And don't forget the delays. All of this vetting consumes valuable time. 94% doctors said that this process delayed care. 78% said it led to patients abandoning treatment. And 25% said it led to adverse events in patients. If you go online, you can find many such stories. Doctors prescribing medicines or procedures only for insurers to deny it. So there is genuine anger against insurance firms. They have been taking Americans for a ride. Around 18% Americans have taken loans for medical treatment. Their collective debt is $220 billion. This is not unique to America. These problems exist elsewhere as well, including in India. But frankly, it is unacceptable for a country like the US, a country that spends almost $900 billion on its military. So questions are going to be asked, not just of insurance companies and their CEOs, but also politicians. A handful of companies dominate American healthcare. They protect their interests by lobbying politicians. Reports say there are some 3,000 health lobbyists in the United States. They spent a total of $700 million last year. That money is keeping reforms at bay. So America's insurance problems go far beyond one company or one CEO. It stems from a broken system. Outraging on the internet will not fix it. Neither will celebrating the killing of a man. Over 100 people killed after barrel bombs hit a busy market. 22 people killed after an artillery shell hit a bus. 5 people killed after a famine-hit displacement camp was shelled. 6 people killed after a drone exploded. All of this happened in just 2 days. 2 days in Sudan. A civil war has been raging in Sudan for 20 months now. The Sudanese army is fighting against a paramilitary group called the RSF. It is being called the biggest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. Tens of thousands of people are dead, at least 11 million people are displaced, and the fighting is getting worse. Both sides are escalating the conflict and they don't seem to care if they kill each other or innocent civilians. Here's our report.
Monday was the weekly market day in the Sudanese town of Kabkabia. It's a small town in the North Darfur. People from nearby villages made their way to the market to try and make a living. But instead, over 100 people were killed. Bombs fell from the sky, indiscriminate barrel bombs. Their purpose was to kill anyone and anything in the target zone. The aftermath was horrific. Who attacked the market-going civilians? It was almost certainly the Sudanese army. They're the only ones with fighter jets in the country. The only ones who could have dropped the barrel bombs. Why did they kill those civilians? Apparently, the victims were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Kabkabia town isn't controlled by the military. It's held by the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF is a paramilitary group. It has been fighting a civil war against Sudan's military junta. The RSF controls almost the entire North Darfur region, including Kabkabia. So the Sudanese army keeps conducting airstrikes on the town. They denied responsibility for Monday's attack, but insisted that they have every right to strike any RSF location. The RSF and the Sudanese army have been fighting each other for over 20 months now. No side shows any signs of backing down. In fact, they're both intensifying their attacks. The army leveled the Kabkabia market on Monday. The next day, the RSF responded with heavy shelling in Omdurman. Omdurman is part of Sudan's national capital region. The RSF holds the capital Khartoum, but the army holds Omdurman across the Nile River. Both sides traded artillery fire yesterday, and the RSF are accused of killing 65 people. This includes 22 people who were traveling in a bus. Again, ordinary people. But the bombs don't differentiate. This is what was left of the bus. None of the passengers survived.
This targeting, instead of being directed at our heroes on the front lines, is aimed at these innocent civilians in their everyday lives, whether on public transportation or in markets. This is an attack on the people, while war should be fought on battlefields and with regular forces.
That was Khartoum's military-appointed governor. That is why he called the Sudanese soldiers heroes. But, as we've seen, there are no heroes in this war. Just mass murderers on both sides. At least 61,000 people have been killed in the Sudanese civil war, and that is a conservative estimate. About 11 million people have been displaced. 25 million are in need of aid. The country is on the brink of famine, but neither side is willing to bring an end to the conflict. No matter who finally wins the civil war, it's the ordinary people who will have lost everything.
टॉर्चर किया हम लोग को, वो भी टॉर्चर किया, पर मेरा बच्चा अपने ऊपर सब लेके अपना, मेरा बच्चा सब बर्दाश्त किया, हम लोग को भी नहीं सहने दिया। अपना कष्ट अपने झेलता रहा, अंदर ही अंदर घुट गया एकदम, बर्दाश्त से बाजुल कर दी। मेरा बच्चा एकदम अंदर से टूट गया था रे बाप रे बाप। मेरा बच्चा अंदर से बिल्कुल टूट गया था। इतना टॉर्चर हुआ मेरा बच्चा कि टूट गया एकदम अंदर से।
अभी मीडिया का ही तेरा है क्या हुआ?
बस लाश
कहाँ?
मेरा बच्चा अंदर से बिल्कुल टूट गया।
आपके बेटा आपको कुछ बताए थे क्या हुआ था और हो क्या रहा था सर? क्यों ऐसा डिसीजन लिए है?
हमारा बेटा हमको कहता था कि पापा हम जाते हैं कोर्ट में तो हमारे पास हमको जो है सो पूरा जस्टिस नहीं मिलता है वहाँ। हर आदमी हमको जो है सो कानून व्यवस्था के अंतर्गत कोई काम नहीं होता है, और ये नियम से चलने वाला, कानून से चलने वाला आदमी था, लेकिन ये कभी भी जो है सो वहाँ की कानून व्यवस्था को एकदम मानता था कि एकदम खत्म है।
सही है सर। क्या क्या बताए थे सर आपके बेटा? इससे पहले आपकी जो बात हुई थी, कब बात हुई थी और क्या हुआ क्या था?
मार्च के महीना में वो गया था। मार्च के महीना के बाद जब आया ना तो कहा कि पापा वहाँ का जो मीडिएशन का जो जज हैं, चाहे जो भी लोग है, वकील है चाहे जज है, जो भी है, वो वहाँ के कानून व्यवस्था जो लॉ है अपने भारत का, उस लॉ से नहीं चलता है। लोग उस लॉ को मानता ही नहीं है। जो ये बता रहा था कि इस धारा में ये लॉ होना चाहिए, तो वो उसको हाई कोर्ट के, सुप्रीम कोर्ट के लॉ को भी नहीं मानता था।
क्या बोले थे आपके बेटा आपको? उनको हो क्या रहा था?
उनको कुछ नहीं, उनको तो 40 बार बेंगलोर, कम से कम 40 बार गया होगा बेंगलोर से बड़ा जौनपुर, और माने इतनी धारा उस पर एक खत्म हो जाता था केस तो दूसरा लगा देती थी। इस बात के कारण जो है तो भीतर से फ्रस्ट्रेट था, लेकिन हम लोग को महसूस नहीं होने दिया कि क्या है नहीं है। एकाएक हम लोग को खबर गई है कि वो अपना पूरा मेल वगैरह हमारे छोटे लड़के को रात में किया है 1:30 बजे 2 बजे, हमारे पास 3 बजे उसका फ़ोन आया है। उसके बाद हम लोग कैसे कैसे करके वहाँ से पटना आए हैं, एयरपोर्ट पटना से बेंगलोर पहुँचे 4 बजे शाम में।
मतलब सर आप जानते हैं कि उनके फैमिली कुछ जो अपने वाइफ के ऊपर और उनके फैमिली के ऊपर जो
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. In Syria, rebel fighters set fire to the tomb of Bashar al-Assad's father. The US intercepts a ballistic missile during a test off the coast of Guam for the first time, and a London aquarium finds a unique way to celebrate Christmas, with Santa and his elf diving into the waters. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1936, Britain's King Edward VIII abdicated the throne for love. He was the first British monarch to do this voluntarily. He did it to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Back then, marrying a divorcee was a strict no for the royal family. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Our top story, a 34-year-old techie from Uttar Pradesh committed suicide at his residence in Bengaluru on Monday. This death has triggered a larger debate on men's rights on social media. Atul Subhash, who was an engineer at a private firm, left behind a 24-page suicide note in which he accused his wife and her relatives of harassment. Initial investigations suggest that Subhash had been